Our story begins not with a king or a conqueror, but with the unpredictable temper of the sea. In the spring of the year 1900, a small vessel carrying a team of Greek sponge divers from the island of Sami was sailing through the Aegean. They were hardy men, accustomed to the whims of the wind and water. But the storm that descended upon them was of a different order, a furious tempest that turned the sky a bruised purple and churned the sea into a frenzy of white-capped waves. Their captain, Demetrios Kontos, had no choice but to seek shelter, guiding his small ship towards the nearest lee shore he could find, the rugged, sparsely inhabited island of Antikythera, a rocky outpost lying between the Peloponnese and Crete. For days they waited, anchored, in the relative calm of the island's bay, listening to the gale howl around them. When the storm finally broke, and a pale sun returned to a placid sea, the crew was restless. Their planned route had been disrupted, and their time was valuable. Instead of moving on immediately, Captain Kontos made a decision. They were in uncharted waters, a place where no sponge diver had worked before. Perhaps, he thought, fortune had guided them here for a reason. One of his most experienced divers, a man named Elias Stadiatis, prepared to make the first descent. Donning the heavy canvas suit and the bulbous bronze helmet of the standard diving dress of his era, he was lowered over the side, sinking slowly into the silent blue depths. He descended to a depth of roughly 45 meters, nearly 150 feet down, where the world transformed into a realm of deep blue twilight. The seabed below was sandy, dotted with rocks and seaweed. As his weighted boots touched the bottom, he began to explore. And then he saw it. Not the sponges he was looking for, but a sight so strange, so unsettling, that it sent a jolt of fear through him. Strewn across the seafloor was what looked like a battlefield of ghosts. He saw the decaying remains of horses, their forms grotesquely preserved, and the pale, twisted shapes of human bodies, all in a state of unnatural decay. Panicked, he signaled to be pulled to the surface. He broke through the waves, sputtering, and ripped off his helmet, his face pale with shock. He babbled to his captain about what he had seen: a heap of dead naked women and horses on the sea floor. Captain Kontos was a man of the sea, a pragmatist. He suspected the diver's mind had been addled by the deep water, a phenomenon they knew as nitrogen narcosis. To verify the story, he donned the heavy gear himself and descended to the spot. When he reached the bottom, he understood his diver's terror, but he saw the scene with a clearer eye. They were not bodies. They were statues. Beautiful, life-sized bronze statues, their surfaces corroded by centuries in the salt water, giving them the pallid, ghostly appearance that had so frightened Elias Stadiatis. They were part of the cargo of an ancient shipwreck. The divers had not stumbled upon a graveyard, but upon a treasure trove, a vessel from the classical world that had been resting in the silent deep for 2,000 years. Realizing the immense historical significance of their find, the divers abandoned their search for sponges. They reported their discovery to the authorities in Athens and the Greek government, recognizing a unique opportunity to reclaim a piece of its heritage, sponsored a recovery expedition. For the next 10 months, in what became the world's first major underwater archaeological excavation, the sponge divers worked tirelessly under perilous conditions. The deep dives were dangerous, pushing the limits of what was possible with the technology of the time. The work was arduous, and tragically, it claimed the life of one diver and left two others permanently paralyzed. Yet, what they brought to the surface was breathtaking. They recovered magnificent works of art that now form the core of the collection at the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. There was the stunning bronze statue known as the Antikythera Youth, a masterpiece of classical sculpture. There were marble statues, intricate glassware, beautiful pottery, and gold jewelry. And amidst these glorious, easily recognizable treasures, they also recovered a few shapeless, corroded lumps of bronze. One piece, about the size of a large book, was particularly unremarkable. It was calcified and green, its form obscured by millennia of marine concretions. It was logged and sent to the museum along with the rest of the find, where it was placed in storage, considered little more than a piece of a bronze statue, or perhaps a part of the ship's fittings. For decades, it sat there, silent and forgotten, its secret locked away inside. It was not until May of 1902 that the lump's true nature began to reveal itself. An archaeologist named Valerio Stias was examining the artifacts from the shipwreck. He picked up the lump, and as he handled it, a piece of the outer, calcified layer broke away. What he saw inside made him stop. It was not the solid bronze of a statue. He could see, embedded within the rock-like concretion, the unmistakable, geometric form of a gear wheel. He saw a faint inscription in ancient Greek. He looked closer and saw more gears, layered one upon another. He suggested, in a moment of brilliant intuition, that this was not a rock, but some kind of astronomical clock. His hypothesis was met with derision. The prevailing view of history at the time simply could not accommodate such an idea. The consensus was that gearing of this complexity, especially a system of interlocking gears designed for calculation, was a modern invention, a product of the great cathedral clockmakers of 14th century Europe at the earliest. To suggest that the ancient Greeks, for all their philosophical and artistic genius, possessed this level of mechanical engineering was deemed preposterous. Stas's idea was dismissed, and the lump was once again relegated to the museum's storerooms, its secret still safe. And there it might have remained, were it not for the persistent curiosity of a historian of science named Derek de Solla Price. Beginning in the 1950s, Price became fascinated by the object. He spent years studying the fragments, persuading the museum to allow him to take X-rays. What his radiographs revealed was astonishing. The lump was not just a few gears. It was a complex, interlocking system of at least 30 distinct gear wheels, all arranged in a sophisticated, non-obvious way. It was a machine. Price painstakingly mapped the gears, counting their teeth, tracing their connections. He published his findings in 1974 in a landmark paper titled Gears from the Greeks. In it, he argued that the device was an ancient analog computer, a mechanical calculator of the cosmos. It was, he declared, as significant in the history of technology as the discovery of a jet engine in the tomb of Tutankhamun. This time, the world listened. The object was given a name, the Antikythera Mechanism, and the central, defining mystery was born. If this device was real, if it was as complex as it appeared, then who on earth, in the ancient world possessed the genius to build it? To answer that question, we cannot simply look at the object itself. We must first journey back into the world that conceived it. We must understand the intellectual soil from which such a brilliant flower could grow. This was the Hellenistic world, a period of explosive scientific and philosophical inquiry that followed the conquests of Alexander the Great. It was a world that had, for the first time, begun to believe that the universe was not just a stage for the whims of the gods, but a cosmos, an ordered, rational, and understandable system. This intellectual revolution began centuries earlier, with the pre-Socratic philosophers. Thinkers like Thales of Miletus proposed that natural phenomena had natural, not supernatural, causes. Anaximander imagined the earth as a cylinder floating freely in the center of the infinite, surrounded by rings of fire, and Pythagoras and his followers introduced the most powerful idea of all, that the universe was governed by the language of mathematics. They believed that the harmony of the planets was a form of celestial music, a music of the spheres, governed by numerical ratios, just like the notes of a lyre. This was a profound shift. It was the birth of logos, of reason, as a tool to understand the world, replacing the old stories of mythos. By the time of the great Athenian philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, this idea was firmly entrenched. Plato, a student of the Pythagorean tradition, imagined the universe being crafted by a divine artisan, the demiurge, who imposed mathematical order on chaotic matter. He envisioned the planets moving in perfect, uniform circles. His student Aristotle codified this vision into a comprehensive physical model of the universe that would dominate Western thought for nearly 2,000 years. In Aristotle's model, the Earth was a stationary sphere at the center of everything. Around it, a series of concentric, crystalline spheres, each carrying a celestial body: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn rotated with perfect uniform motion. This model was beautiful and philosophically satisfying, but it had a problem. It didn't quite match what astronomers actually saw in the sky. The planets did not move in perfect, steady circles. They appeared to speed up and slow down. Most bizarrely, some planets, like Mars, would occasionally stop their eastward drift through the stars, move backward for a time in what is called retrograde motion, and then resume their forward course. To save the philosophical principle of uniform circular motion, while accounting for these strange observations, Greek astronomers developed increasingly complex geometric models. The astronomer Eudoxus of Cnidus proposed a system of nested spheres, each rotating on a different axis to replicate the planet's wandering paths. Later, the great geometer Apollonius of Perga introduced the concepts of eccentrics and epicycles. An eccentric model proposed that a planet moved in a perfect circle, but that the Earth was not quite at the center of that circle. An epicycle was even more ingenious. It imagined a planet moving in a small circle, the epicycle, whose center in turn moved along a larger circle, the deferent, around the Earth. By adjusting the sizes and speeds of these circles, astronomers could approximate the observed planetary motions with remarkable accuracy. This was the astronomical software of the Hellenistic age. It was a complex, purely mathematical system for predicting the future positions of the celestial bodies. But to create the Antikythera Mechanism, you need more than just software. You need hardware. You need a tradition of fine mechanics, of crafting intricate machines from metal. And that tradition also existed, centered in the great intellectual powerhouse of the Hellenistic world, Alexandria in Egypt. Founded by Alexander the Great, Alexandria was home to the legendary library and the museum, a research institution that was a forerunner of the modern university. Here, brilliant minds were subsidized by the ruling Ptolemaic dynasty to pursue knowledge for its own sake. One of these figures was Ctesibius of Alexandria, a 3rd century BCE inventor who is often called the father of pneumatics. He was a barber's son who became fascinated with using the power of air and water. He invented a force pump, a water organ, and most importantly for our story, he perfected the water clock, or clepsydra. Early water clocks were simple vessels that dripped water at a steady rate. Ctesibius transformed them into elaborate, automated marvels. He designed systems with feedback mechanisms to ensure a constant flow of water, and he added gears and linkages to display the time with moving pointers and even trigger automated figurines that would move or make sounds at certain hours. His work was carried on by others, like Philo of Byzantium, who wrote treatises on mechanical devices, including war machines, pneumatics, and automata. These engineers of Alexandria established a tradition of precision mechanics. They knew how to design and cut gears, and they understood how to create complex machines that could perform automated, predictable tasks. So, by the middle of the 2nd century BCE, all the necessary ingredients were in place. There was a philosophical belief that the universe was a rational, understandable system. There was a sophisticated mathematical astronomy capable of predicting celestial events. And there was a well-established tradition of fine mechanical engineering capable of crafting intricate, geared devices. The stage was set. All that was needed was for a particular group of geniuses to bring these 3 streams of knowledge together into a single, magnificent creation. And to find them, we must turn to our list of suspects. Our first candidate, the towering figure of Archimedes of Syracuse, seems a perfect fit. Living in the 3rd century BCE, he was arguably the greatest mathematician and inventor of antiquity. He was a master of geometry, physics, and mechanics. Legends of his inventions are famous. The Archimedes screw for raising water, his discovery of the principle of buoyancy in his bathtub, and the fearsome war machines, catapults, cranes, and perhaps even death rays using mirrors that he built to defend his home city of Syracuse from the Romans. Crucially for our investigation, Cicero, the Roman orator and statesman writing in the 1st century BCE, tells us that Archimedes constructed at least 2 mechanical spheres. One was a solid celestial globe, a map of the stars on its surface. The other was far more complex. Cicero writes that this second device could replicate the motions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets, and could even show how the moon's shadow fell upon the earth to produce a solar eclipse. He said it was a machine where a single turn could set in motion different speeds for different celestial bodies. The description is an almost perfect match for the Antikythera Mechanism. However, there is a significant problem: the timeline. Archimedes was killed by a Roman soldier during the sack of Syracuse in 212 BCE. Scientific analysis of the shipwreck suggests it sank around 70 to 60 BCE. And linguistic analysis of the Greek inscriptions on the mechanism itself, particularly the style of the lettering, points to a construction date somewhere between 150 and 100 BCE. This is at least 60 years, and perhaps more than a century, after Archimedes' death. He could not have been the one to build this specific device. But the connection is too strong to dismiss entirely. Perhaps the best way to think of Archimedes is as the great ancestor, the proof of concept. He was the one who first demonstrated that such a wondrous fusion of astronomy and mechanics was possible. The mechanism found in the shipwreck was not his own work, but it was almost certainly a product of the tradition he established. The knowledge he pioneered did not die with him. It was passed down, refined, and improved upon by his intellectual descendants. To find the direct builder, we must move forward in time and look for the astronomer whose specific knowledge is encoded in the machine's gears. This search leads us inexorably to one man, Hipparchus of Nicaea. Often hailed as the greatest observational astronomer of the ancient world, Hipparchus lived and worked from about 190 to 120 BCE. This timeline fits the creation of the mechanism perfectly. He spent most of his productive life on the island of Rhodes, a major center of commerce and learning. He was a meticulous and tireless observer of the heavens. He created the first comprehensive star catalog of the Western world, listing over 850 stars, and inventing the system of stellar magnitudes to describe their brightness, a system we still use in a modified form today. By comparing his own observations with those of earlier Babylonian and Greek astronomers, he made his most famous discovery: the precession of the equinoxes, the slow 26,000-year wobble of the Earth's axis. But it is his work on the Sun and Moon that connects him directly to the Antikythera Mechanism. Previous astronomers had worked with simple models, but Hipparchus, using a wealth of observational data, developed far more sophisticated and accurate theories. He calculated the length of the year to within 6 minutes of the correct value. Most impressively, he tackled the complex, irregular motion of the moon. He knew that the moon's speed varies throughout its orbit, a phenomenon we now know is because its orbit is elliptical, not circular. To model this, Hipparchus developed a sophisticated epicyclic theory. The builders of the Antikythera Mechanism faced the same problem: how to make their moon pointer speed up and slow down at the correct times. Their solution was a moment of pure mechanical genius. They used what is now called a pin and slot mechanism. One gear, representing the average motion of the moon, had a pin attached to it. This pin fit into a slot on a second gear. Because the first gear was mounted slightly off-center, as it rotated, the pin would slide back and forth in the slot, forcing the second gear to subtly accelerate and decelerate. This ingenious arrangement of two simple gears perfectly models Hipparchus's advanced lunar theory. It is, in essence, his epicyclic model, translated from the language of geometry into the language of bronze. The astronomical software running on the Antikythera Mechanism is unmistakably the work of Hipparchus. This points strongly to the island of Rhodes as the place of its creation. And it is on Rhodes that we find our final and most compelling suspect. Remember Cicero, who told us of Archimedes' sphere? In the same passage, he describes another, more recent device that he had personally seen. This machine, he says, was built by his friend Posidonius of Apamea. Posidonius was a towering intellectual figure of the late Hellenistic period. He was a Stoic philosopher, a historian, a geographer, and an astronomer. and from about 95 BCE until his death, he ran a celebrated academy on the island of Rhodes. Cicero's description of Posidonius's machine is a near-perfect match for the Antikythera Mechanism. He says that it showed the motions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets, which in their revolutions, day and night, brought about what had been predicted. The location, the time period, and the description all align. And so, the most plausible theory emerges from the fog of history. The Antikythera Mechanism was likely not the work of a single, isolated inventor. It was the product of a school of thought, a workshop, almost certainly located on the island of Rhodes. It was a synthesis, a collaboration. It brought together the brilliant astronomical theories of Hipparchus, who had worked on the island just a generation earlier, with the philosophical and mechanical tradition of Posidonius's academy. Hipparchus provided the scientific blueprint. Posidonius and a circle of artisans and scholars likely provided the engineering expertise and the philosophical drive to build it. Even the linguistic evidence from the inscriptions, which use month names from a Corinthian calendar, supports this, as Rhodes was a cosmopolitan hub with strong ties to Corinthian colonies. The science, the history, the mechanics, and the geography all point to one place: a workshop of geniuses on the island of Rhodes, around the end of the 2nd century BCE. Having established the world that made it and the minds that likely conceived it, let us now return to the object itself. Let us take a guided tour of this marvel as reconstructed by modern science. Imagine a wooden box, roughly the size of a shoebox, with large dials on the front and back. A handle or knob protrudes from the side. This is the main input. Turning this handle drives the entire system, advancing time forward or backward. On the front of the box is the main display. It features 2 large concentric dials. The outer ring is a calendar of 365 days, based on the Egyptian solar calendar, which was simpler for calculations than the complex lunar solar calendars of the Greeks. Inside, this is the second ring, marked with the 12 constellations of the zodiac. Within these rings, at least 7 pointers move at different speeds. There is a pointer for the sun, showing its date and its position in the zodiac. There is a pointer for the moon, which not only shows its position, but also has a clever, half-silvered, half-black ball that rotates to display the lunar phase. And there were pointers for the 5 planets known to the Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. A separate, smaller dial within the main display was a calendar that could be adjusted for the leap day every 4 years. This front dial was the public face of the mechanism, a beautiful and intuitive map of the heavens. But the true genius, the intricate calculational engine, was hidden on the back. The back face of the mechanism is dominated by 2 large, elegant spiral dials. The upper spiral is the Metonic calendar. This was a crucial cycle for Greek civic life. The Greeks used a lunar solar calendar, trying to reconcile the 29.5-day cycle of the moon with the 365.25-day cycle of the sun. The Metonic cycle, discovered by the 5th century BCE astronomer Metona of Athens, states that 235 lunar months, almost perfectly, equals 19 solar years. This spiral dial, with 235 divisions, allowed the user to track this complex cycle and keep the civic calendar aligned with the seasons. Nested inside this spiral is another, smaller dial, The Olympiad dial. It is divided into 4 sectors, each inscribed with a year and the names of the locations of the major Panhellenic games, including the Isthmian, Nemean, Pythian, and, of course, the most important of all, the Olympic Games. This was not just a scientific instrument. It was a device deeply embedded in the cultural life of the Hellenic world. The lower spiral on the back is perhaps the most scientifically sophisticated part of the entire machine. This is the Saros dial, the eclipse predictor. The Saros cycle is a period of 223 lunar months, or about 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. The ancient Babylonians had discovered that after one Saros cycle, the sun, moon, and earth return to nearly the same relative geometry, meaning that the pattern of eclipses repeats. The Saros dial is a spiral with 223 divisions. Inscriptions within the dial, at the correct month markings, indicate when an eclipse is predicted, using glyphs for sun and moon. It even appears to have included information about the character of the eclipse, such as its color or magnitude. Instead, within this Saros dial is a smaller dial, called the Exeligmos dial. Since the Saros cycle is about 8 hours longer than a whole number of days, each successive eclipse in a series will occur about 8 hours later, or 1/3 of a day. The Exeligmos dial tracked this, indicating how many hours to add to the time of an eclipse from the previous cycle to get the correct time for the next one. All of this, the planets, the moon phases, the calendars, the eclipse predictions, was driven by what lay inside the box, a clockwork of at least 30, and perhaps as many as 70, precisely engineered bronze gears. The gear teeth were not crudely cut. They were small, triangular, and uniform, crafted with a precision that suggests a deep understanding of mechanics. The gear trains were a masterpiece of calculation. They were designed to model the complex ratios of planetary motion. For example, the Metonic cycle requires a ratio of 235 to 19. The designers used a clever system of gears to approximate this. The gears for the planets were even more complex, and their full workings are still a subject of intense research. And at the heart of it all was the differential gear. This is a system of gears that can take 2 different inputs and produce an output that is their sum or difference. In the mechanism, it was likely used to calculate the phase of the moon by subtracting the sun's motion from the moon's motion. This invention is extraordinary. The first known differential gear to appear after the fall of Rome was in a clock made in 1575. The first one to be widely recognized was in the 18th century. To find it here, in a device from the 2nd century BCE, is simply breathtaking. It demonstrates a level of mechanical insight that was thought to be utterly modern. And finally, covering the front and back plates of the mechanism, and even on some of the interior surfaces, were inscriptions. Tens of thousands of tiny, neatly inscribed Greek characters, forming what is essentially a user's manual. It explained what the user was seeing on the dials, described the astronomical cycles the machine was based on, and gave instructions on its use. It was this text that helped modern researchers decipher the machine's true purpose and confirmed the astronomical theories it embodied. So now we have a complete picture, a portable, geared computer of the cosmos, built in a workshop on Rhodes, embodying the pinnacle of Hellenistic astronomical and mechanical knowledge. The next question in our story is a sad one. What happened to it? How did this particular device end up at the bottom of the sea? The shipwreck in which it was found dates to around 70 to 60 BCE. This was a time when the Roman Republic was expanding and consolidating its power over the Mediterranean. Wealthy Romans had developed a passion for Greek art and culture. They filled their villas with Greek statues, their libraries with Greek scrolls, and they hired Greek tutors for their children. There was a booming trade in Greek luxury goods, flowing from the great cultural centers of the East, like Rhodes, Pergamon, and Athens, to the burgeoning metropolis of Rome. The ship that sank off Antikythera was almost certainly one of these treasure ships. Its cargo was immensely valuable. It was likely commissioned by a powerful Roman general or a wealthy merchant, intended to adorn a magnificent villa. We can imagine the scene: the ship, heavily laden with its precious cargo of bronze and marble statues, fine glassware, and this one, unique mechanical marvel, sailing west towards Italy. Then, somewhere in the treacherous channel between Crete and the Greek mainland, it was caught in one of those sudden, violent Mediterranean storms. It was driven onto the rocks of the desolate island of Antikythera and sank, taking its treasures and its crew to the silent depths, where it would lie undisturbed for the next 2,000 years. The sinking of this one ship explains the loss of this one mechanism, but it does not answer the larger, more haunting question: why did the knowledge behind it disappear? Why is the Antikythera mechanism the only object of its kind ever found? Why did this incredible technological tradition seemingly vanish from the face of the earth for over a millennium? There is likely no single answer, but rather a confluence of factors. First, these devices must have been exceptionally rare and expensive. The raw material, bronze, was valuable, but the true cost would have been in the craftsmanship. It would have taken a team of master artisans and scholars years to design and build such a machine. They would have been the ultimate luxury items, commissioned by kings or extremely wealthy patrons. Much like a grand complication watch today, there may never have been very many of them to begin with. Second, the survival of bronze from the ancient world is notoriously poor. In times of war or economic hardship, bronze was simply too valuable to be left as a statue or a machine. It was melted down to be recast as weapons, armor, tools, or coins. It is a sad irony that the very value of the mechanism's material made its survival highly unlikely. The fact that ours was sealed in a shipwreck, safe from the melting pots of later centuries, is a miracle of preservation. But the most profound reason for its disappearance was likely the slow decay of the very society that created it. The Hellenistic world, with its great state-sponsored research institutions like the Museum in Alexandria, was a unique environment for scientific progress. As Rome took over, the focus shifted. The Romans were brilliant practical engineers. They built aqueducts, roads, and monuments that stand to this day, but they were generally less interested in the kind of pure, theoretical science that had flourished under the Greeks. The intricate chain of knowledge transfer from master to apprentice, required to build something as complex as the mechanism, became fragile. Over the subsequent centuries, the world that could conceive of and build the mechanism slowly crumbled. The Roman Empire faced economic crises, political instability, and eventually collapse. The Great Library of Alexandria, a repository of centuries of knowledge, suffered a series of destructive events. The intricate web of scholarship that had connected the Mediterranean world frayed and broke. Knowledge was lost. Texts were not copied. Skills were not passed on. The very idea of the universe as a rational mechanical system was, in many parts of the Western world, replaced by more mystical and faith-based worldviews. The specific advanced branch of knowledge that combined theoretical astronomy with precision mechanics simply withered away. It was a fragile blossom of genius, and when the climate changed, it died. For over 14 centuries, the world forgot that it had ever been so clever. When complex geared devices finally reappeared in the great astronomical clocks of late medieval Europe, their makers had no idea that they were, in a sense, reinventing a lost art. They were starting again from scratch, unaware that their intellectual ancestors had walked that same path so long before. And so, we return to the present day, to the museum in Athens where the fragments of the mechanism now rest. The story does not end with its rediscovery. A new chapter began, one of a global team of scientists, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, using the most advanced technology of our time to unlock the secrets of the most advanced technology of the ancient world. They used custom-built computed tomography, CT scanners to peer inside the corroded fragments, digitally separating the gears and revealing their intricate inner workings. They used a technique called polynomial texture mapping, PTM, to create interactive digital images of the surfaces, allowing them to read the faint inscriptions that were invisible to the naked eye. Their work has transformed our understanding of the device. It has confirmed its staggering complexity, revealed the purpose of its various dials, and allowed for the creation of stunningly accurate digital and physical reconstructions. It is a story of modern science paying homage to ancient science. The Antikythera Mechanism is more than just a rusty piece of bronze. It is a profound and humbling object. It is a corrective to our modern arrogance, to the easy assumption that we are the pinnacle of a long, simple, upward climb of progress. It shows us that history is more complex than that, with peaks of stunning achievement and deep valleys of forgotten knowledge. It is a testament to the boundless ingenuity of the human mind, a reminder that genius is not the sole property of our own age. It rests now in its climate-controlled case, its journey over. From a workshop on Rhodes to a treasure ship bound for Rome, to 2 millennia of silence on the seafloor, to a sponge diver's frightened gasp, to a museum storeroom, and finally into the light of modern science. It is a ghost from a lost world, a whisper across 20 centuries, and it leaves us with a final, tantalizing thought. If this one object survived by sheer, dumb luck, what other wonders did the ancient world create that were not so fortunate? What other marvels of art, science, and engineering are still waiting in the dark, silent places of the earth, holding their secrets, waiting to be found? The Antikythera Mechanism does not give us all the answers. Instead, it gives us better, more wondrous questions, and that, perhaps, is its greatest gift.